Now, because we have tried to make sure that we get these board meeting agendas into the Webster Herald 8 days before the board meetings, the next two resolutions were not in the Webster Herald, but have been put on the agenda on Facebook and on, I think, the town website in the last couple of days. And I think where I'm not a big fan of adding things to an agenda that was already posted, once Mr. Matt Chatfield, the Executive Director of the Webster Economic Development Alliance, presents to the board and enters into Q&A on these two items, I think people will see why it was necessary from a time sensitivity standpoint to get these on to the agenda tonight. So, Matt, if you wouldn't mind jumping up to the podium. And I think Kim Doyle had put your packets into each of the board members.
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
you did.
Okay.
I did say we can distribute this. The other particular project in the north end. I failed to put a map of that in my presentation. I don't know if you want me to distribute that.
And the north end is the combination village and town. Okay.
Would you like me to put
If you wouldn't mind, because I think it would be a good visual for the board members. Yes.
Thanks, Matt.
Long day, huh, Matt?
Very long, sir. Very long. Thanks, man.
Matt and I had coffee at 7:30 at the WIDA monthly board meeting. 7:30 this morning. Luckily, he's young.
Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, well, are we ready for me to begin
Yes.
my dog and pony show?
You're
Great, thank you. Thank you for the time this evening. Again, Matt Chatfield, Executive Director of the Webster Economic Development Alliance. It is our local, Webster Local Development Corporation, charged with coordinating economic development on behalf of the Webster community at large, the broader community, town, village, school district, chamber of commerce, and then in the village, the business improvement district. And one of the things that we are charged with is identifying potential funding sources through the state and local means, and identifying opportunities for those funding sources to be spent here locally. And annually, the Genesee Transportation Council puts out a call for transportation planning projects. So these funds are transportation funds that flow from the federal government to the Genesee Transportation Council, which is charged with a 9-county region, and it distributes those transportation dollars, those federal transportation dollars here locally. Some of the money, the majority of it, goes towards transportation improvements, physical improvements to infrastructure. There's a small component of that annually gets set aside for transportation planning grants that prepare projects to move from concept phase to construction, to engineering and construction. And in the past, the Alliance has been successful. For example, this was the genesis of the North Avenue Connector project in the village of Webster. A circulation, accessibility, and parking study was applied for and awarded back in 2012. The Alliance obtained that funding for the village. The planning study was conducted, and then 2 years later, we were able to apply for federal transportation dollars to construct those improvements. So it's a logical step, and this is just part of that program. So this year, the call for projects came out on September 11th, barely 3 weeks ago. We have until October 16th to actually submit an application. So it's very rare that you can pull something off in that short period of time. However, I think we have a couple good projects that have been identified here locally. And the one that I want to talk about tonight ends up being in the town of Webster and the West End district. So, but just to go quickly and tell you more about the program itself on your packet, page 2. The Unified Planning Work Program provides federal funds for transportation planning projects. $900,000 this year is available, and it's very competitive. Typically, $1.2 to $1.3 million of projects are submitted. So not every project that gets submitted is awarded. And typically, to be honest, Monroe County communities don't often get favor with these planning programs. It's very much curried favor in the past to municipalities in the southern tier or municipalities that are outside Monroe County that probably would not be able to undertake such a project on their own absent the assistance from the Genesee Transportation Council. But that being said, I think we have a very good opportunity based on the projects that we've identified here locally to submit. So the program is not physical improvements. The GCC offers planning funds to plan physical improvements, but these planning funds are strictly for studies. They are, and not even for engineering. So this is not for design. This is strictly for planning studies, conceptual studies. But it also conducts, can be for studies that are related to the connection between transportation and land use, because those two things are very much connected. If you look, for instance, the Ridge Road corridor, the land uses that take place on there have a direct impact on the transportation network, right? So Genesee Transportation Council recognizes the direct correlation between land use and transportation and provides planning funds for communities to study that. So it's not just for planning roadway improvements as much as it could be for planning changes to the land use pattern. If the town wanted to contemplate changes to its zoning code, it could do so in small areas, targeted areas, via this source of funds. Now, it's not going to fund an entire comp plan update, but for targeted areas that have a direct correlation with transportation infrastructure, that is a viable use of these dollars. Okay? So, and we'll go through the benefits of a UPWP project. So there is a robust public participation requirement as part of the funds. So there needs to be a significant number of public meetings and outreach to the community regarding the planning studies that are being undertaken. So it's not something that could be conducted behind the scenes internally or administratively. This is something that does need to be conducted out in the open, in the public purview, with public involvement in mind. So it's not as if these plans could be conducted here in the office. The funds would have to be spent out in the public. The outcomes can be part of your comprehensive plan, like I just said. So not even just zoning, but even just the whole, how you would treat or want to treat future development within the community, within targeted areas, along corridors, in neighborhoods, in industrial areas. These have direct correlation with the transportation network. And then on top of it, a successful planning project then gets preference and priority for federal dollars. So once the project is completed and it does end up getting reviewed, not approved, but reviewed by the Genesee Transportation Council, if it becomes identified as a viable project, it then gets in line for the Transportation Improvement Program, which is another pot of funds, of federal funds that come down to the Genesee Transportation Council. And that TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, is updated about every 3 years. And then you can petition to be a part of that program based on the funds that would come out, or the improvements that would come out of this study. So, and at that point, there would be funding for engineering and design and then construction. Okay, so the first map that you have in your packet shows what is just a broad conceptual outline. Okay, this is strictly, to be honest, it's coming out of my brain about where I think the town could pursue potential funding via this funding source. Okay, and one of those target areas that I have identified starts at Bay Road at Old Ridge and extends along the Old Ridge corridor, and then instead of ending only at the terminus with Ridge Road, I extended it just a little bit further based on the similar land use pattern of those older houses that are fronting on Ridge Road, right? Older converted residences that are now commercial. That pattern extends pretty well solidly to Hatch, and then it kind of ends based on the development pattern that's taken place east of Hatch. So from Hatch to Bay, out basically along the Old Ridge corridor, and then following Empire down to the town boundary. There's a lot of activity going on in this area. There's a lot of transportation corridors. There's a lot of turning movements. There's a lot of driveways. There's a lot of large traffic generators in this area as well. And there's just a land use pattern that hasn't necessarily evolved in a very coordinated fashion. This planning, the planning funds that are available could allow for you to study potential changes or improvements to both the transportation network and then, of course, the land use pattern in this area. And just to highlight, the next pages highlight just some what I would call target areas for consideration. And I think all of us would well believe that the West Webster Hamlet in those four corners at Gravel and Old Ridge has been a target area that the town of Webster would like to see have some improvements made. And this is a first step towards things that could change within that area. I don't propose what those changes would be at this time. That's what the study is for. However, having a target area of this intersection and what we would like to see as a community in the future in this area, this is your opportunity to come up with that plan and then be able to show that plan, whatever that plan is, to private investors or the private marketplace and see if it obviously gains some legs and they have some buy-in from private development and private ownership. The Ridge Road, the Old Ridge corridor, obviously relatively narrow, but there's still some opportunities here to make this a rather unique setting within the West Webster area. Almost village-like for small segments of it to create its own unique identity. The development pattern is very similar to the Village of Webster in this small area, but the transportation network doesn't fit the development pattern. And that the lack of cohesion between the development pattern and the transportation network ends up causing a lack of a sense of place within this particular neighborhood, and then that lack of sense of place tends to drive down property values and investment. So our goal is, if improvements can be made to the transportation network, the hope is that that would facilitate further investment on the private marketplace. Empire Ridge gravel transition, kind of a weird spot within the community, right? We're leaving Ridge Road and then we come into larger development. We have a bowling alley, we have a movie theater, we have a hotel, we have a strip center that's sort of, in an awkward location, and then we have some other small, what we would call legacy development on that Empire Boulevard corridor across from the bowling alley. So there's a lot of turning movements here, there's a lot of activity, and there's, a lack of safety in many regards. And I think we witnessed that earlier this year. So there's a lot of reason for people that would want to come down here on a regular basis, but it's not safe at all for pedestrians and bicyclists to traverse this area. There's just too much traffic, the road is too wide, the speeds are too high, and the curb cuts are too varied, and there's no sidewalks. So we can ad nauseum create a list of reasons why this is an unsafe area for pedestrians and bicyclists, and also motorists, because there's just so many turning movements in a very small area. So this program would allow you to study conceptual improvements to this area that could be made to remedy those challenges and those dangerous situations. And then the final end of the corridor, almost like a dumbbell. If you think about, you have the study area that has, two ends of the dumbbell, and then there's the section in between. The other end of the dumbbell is Old Ridge at Bay. There's already a couple commercial uses in that general area, but obviously those uses could change in the future. Property changes hands. So as property changes hands, that may very well be an opportunity for the town to seek a change in the land use pattern if it wanted one. So this is the opportunity to understand, is there a desire for a change in the land use pattern, or are we very happy with what we have there today? So the funding criteria are that typically projects run about $100,000. Sometimes they'll award $150,000, but for studies of this magnitude, it's typically in that range of $90,000 to $100,000. So that's your typical study. Your typical match is about 10%. So For a normal project of this scope of magnitude, your local match requirement would be right around 10,000 at a maximum number. Okay, because it's 10%. And that can be cash, or that can be in-kind services by staff. And that does include fringe benefits. So that local match can get eaten up quite quickly. However, it is a reimbursement program. So those funds would have to be spent on the study. The consultant would need to be reimbursed, and then you would get reimbursed. Okay? And then they do want to see you actually fund the $10,000 of local match up front, either in the hours spent on the project or the cash. They want to see that set aside, and then you get reimbursed on the back end for 90% of the project. So the next steps are to develop a final scope of work. Obviously, my recommendation is it's very much conceptual at this point. I would leave it up to the board and, of course, at the direction town staff to finalize the scope of work with me. I am writing the grant, but I will do so at the direction of the town board and staff as directed by the town board. Deadline is October 16th. We have 15 days from today. It will typically take me 24 hours to put together an application of solid work.
Do you want to roll right into the other one on North End, or do you want to?
Sure. I'd be happy to. I can answer questions on this, or I can go right into the one that the village is contemplating as well.
There are two separate resolutions.
They are. There are two separate resolutions, but I think it's important for the board to understand, from what Matt has told me, it's impossible that we would get both of these grants awarded to us.
Correct.
So, I think that's
They are
important.
competing against one another, just as much as they're competing against everybody else in the 9-county region.
And it's interesting, and I'll just say that, the fact that, I don't know if this is usual that they give you 35 days. This is dated September 11th that you got this, and now they want the bid, or your grant in by October 16th. That's a tight time frame.
And it's by design. They want it to be something that's already been relatively thought out. That being said, I have enough experience that I feel comfortable putting together an application and doing so and getting the process started. It's worth a shot.
Yeah. And when Matt contacted me last week on this, in layman terms, if we could put ourselves as a community in a position to get $100,000 of grant money, and it might cost the town $10,000, I thought that was worth us really looking at seriously. And that's why, with this short time frame.
Just remember that we're gonna have to put up the $100,000
Yes, sir.
Yes.
and get it reimbursed by the state of New York, which,
Well, it's not it is the Genesee Transportation Council.
Federal.
And the great part about this particular program, as it were, is that GTC would prefer that they be the project manager. They would prefer that because they can assure timely access to the funds. So obviously they would prefer to be the one that interfaces with on the budgetary side and manages that aspect of it so that reimbursement can happen relatively quickly. And I do believe that there is, I'll have to double check whether or not it's reimbursement by task or if it's reimbursement as a whole at the end. Now, a state program like Empire State Development, they want to see every penny spent and they want to see the final study before anything goes out the door.
okay,
This program may allow for interim deliverables and interim expenses.
okay.
Okay, I do need to double check that, but it is true that yes, you spend the money first and then you get reimbursed for it.
One other thing, Matt, is that many years ago, when the Genesee Transportation council was doing the study of the 404 corridor, this area was looked at. And they might have some information, they might have some notes on what they determined to do in there. I think a lot of it went by the wayside because of cost and because of right-of-way, and it would have involved possibly some purchase of private property, but they have some information on this right here.
Right, yeah, the 404 court, that would have been 06, 08?
It would have been before '08.
At least, right?
I would say around '06.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to get my feet underneath me on the sequence of just overall board resolutions is, how they go. But if I understand this correctly, if the board tonight basically gives their blessing in some form of resolution, and boy, Charlie, I'll be looking for your guidance on how we would even word that. That's just basically giving you the confidence to now go and write the grant and submit it on the 16th. I take it you'll need some type of resolution showing that the board understands and is committing to the 10%.
Yes.
If we're awarded the grant.
Yes, you need to provide a hard commitment that you will fund the required matching, the 10% matching.
Okay.
And that typically comes in the cover letter. There's a very relatively short application process.
Yeah.
And then there's a cover letter. You typically will say that in the cover letter because you sign it and then you sign the application.
Right, and then I'm speculating on this one, and hopefully you and or Charlie or the board will. So let's say that we get awarded the grant. Don't we then have to do a resolution that, as a board, to accept the grant?
I've got a question right for Matt. In the package you gave us, it says supervisor must commit in writing to fund the project and provide the matching funds. Is that done as part of the application? So
Yeah.
that's really what the board would be resolving tonight, is committing the supervisor on behalf of the town, correct? So if we submit, in other words, I guess what I'm saying is if we submit, or if you submit the application, if the board agrees to have you submit the application, basically what the town board is saying is we're going to commit upon this application, part of what we're doing is committing to expend the funds.
I guess yes. I mean, you technically are not entering into a contract.
Right.
But yes.
So
I would say that's a fair.
It's a letter of intent, effectively, or, yeah.
Correct.
Not exactly a contract per se, because we haven't gotten anything in return, but we're basically saying, this is what we're agreeing to. If you give us the grant, we are agreeing in advance, and therefore there's...
Correct. And what they do want to avoid communities not having the commitment of funds up front. They don't want to have a community put forth a great project that even ultimately they can't even afford the 10%.
Correct. Because that's really what they want. They want an assurance that the town is committing its resources.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Does the board understand that?
Yes.
Yes.
For what we have to discuss now is where would we get the money from? Where would the money come from? If this grant was awarded to us, where do we get the money from? Bonded or surplus? Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it would, if it's going to be probably a year down the road anyway, right?
Funding would be awarded, funds would not be able to be expended prior to April 1 of 2021. And at that point, the federal funding would be available. At that point, you would, seek an RFP to hire a consultant. That would take some time. By the time the consultant is hired, the project is beginning. It's likely July or August at the earliest, and then at least a 12-month period from there. So you likely could, you could very much do this over 2 budget cycles. You would have a 2021 and a 2022 component.
Yeah, if we don't identify funds in the 21 budget specifically for this, then it would either come from fund balance or from contingency. We do budget contingency in general fund. It could come from that.
Okay.
And all along those lines, as we're about to venture into the public hearing on October 15th about our tentative budget as we move toward the final budget, as an accountant, I'm trying to think, we don't even know if we're going to get awarded this grant. We're applying for it.
Correct. Yeah.
So would we put anything in the 2021 budget for this?
I probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
The whole thing is contingent, so.
Yeah. And to your point, Charlie, is a letter of intent.
I'm just using that phrase.
Sure, and that's, and you know,
I guess they want the assurance, based on what Matt's telling us, they need the assurance that the board's gonna follow through if they grant the application. So,
Yeah.
and like Matt said, they don't want people just making the application, saying, yeah, that's nice, and then walking away from it, because apparently this is, as you said, a competitive process.
Right.
So somebody else would effectively be out the money if they decided.
I mean, they would reprogram it, but, I mean, obviously, they go through a pretty rigorous review. A very rigorous review. I don't know if you have it printed in front of you, but this document would go into that, that review process at the last few pages of it.
And you've given us the application form too, I think, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
well, I don't, to me, you can't really go and do the resolution of 7 and 8. You can't, you almost can't do them individually. The board has to really understand in totality 7 and 8 before they vote on one or the other. And interestingly enough, the one you just described, Matt, is the less convoluted one, because all the land and all the roads are in the town proper.
Yes, sir.
The gravel and ridge area. Resolution 8 is the map you handed out to the board. That area is really 50% in the village and 50% in the town. And, you know, if you don't mind explaining, you did this presentation to the village last Thursday, did you not?
Yes.
On the north end one.
Yes, so the village has elected to submit a grant application for an area identified as the North End Business District. So you would go north of the 104 corridor, and then it would be bisected by Route 250. Okay, and there's a diverse commercial industrial area in that general part of town. And there's neighborhoods to the west, there's industrial to the east, there are the village core area, the main part of the village core, we would say, is due south. There's town, there's, I would say, shopping and services that are within the town proper along the Holt Road corridor, outside of what we're calling the study area. And this is a forgotten zone within town and village of Webster. This area, because it's on the border, because it is bisected or divided by that municipal boundary, it's often been forgotten. And it's very much stood on its own for many years. But change is happening in this area. There's a lot of development and investment that will be taking place in this area on both sides of the boundary. And some of it will happen on the Xerox campus at some point. Some of it very well might happen north of Orchard Street. And then, of course, even just outside the boundary, just west on the old lumber, the old Martin lumber property, there's going to end up being change there too. So this zone will see significant changes in the land use pattern. And as part of that, the transportation network will likely be taxed. It may not be able to keep up. Or in some instances, as in Phillips Road per se, the infrastructure is already overbuilt and it doesn't meet the needs of the community in its current shape. So, and overlaid on top of all of that is a robust network of trails within the community that bring people and activity and funnel them into this area along the 104 trail, along the Hojack Trail. there's the Bird Sanctuary Trail, there's the Chiota Trail, there's the trail interior to North Ponds Park, right? They're all myriad, they all exist, yet they don't really function in a uniform system. There's some connections that would likely make sense, connecting the town's recreation center with some sort of trail network down to the Hojack/104 trail. That's a logical connection that doesn't exist today. And that trail network, if enhanced, would boost the quality of life in that area, for not only for the residents that live there, but more importantly for the employees that we want to be able to attract in this area, and the businesses that we want to be able to attract and attract their investment. We want this to be a great place, not only to live, but to work, so we can attract proper employees and those businesses that are associated, and make this area thrive again. And the transportation network is very much critical to that. And if this project was to just be undertaken by the village, I think we would lose a lot of those potential connections, because the transportation network and the trail network doesn't see the town-village boundary. It doesn't exist. It's make-believe in the eyes of everybody, except the governmental functions. Otherwise, it has a great impact on the land use decisions that are being made on either side of that boundary, but in a physical form, they have, that makes no sense. So coordination in this particular area, I think, would be very important.
And last Thursday night at the village regular town board meeting, you presented this, and they, from what I've been told, and I haven't watched the tape, they did vote on a resolution to
To go after, yeah, to submit an application and go after the funds. And obviously, the boundary as drawn on that map is not a final boundary by any means. If this is something that the town wanted to coordinate on the village with, would make all the sense in the world for town and village staff to get together and talk about that and make some logical decisions. I'm not proposing to make the final decisions. I'm just trying to propose the opportunity and push it forward. The final form of that opportunity and submission will be decided by the town and/or village.
Yeah. I made attempts this week to get the actual verbiage, written verbiage of the village's resolution last Thursday night, and unfortunately I do not have that. It was important for me, and I think important for the board and Charlie and all that, to see what did they commit to. Was their resolution based on, well, we're in if the town next week is in, or are they in independent of the town on this? And that's what I wanted to see, because I thought that might guide us.
My recollection is that they were in regardless.
Okay. Because Mayor Byards, he came over, I think, last Friday.
But I don't speak for the mayor or the village board.
And came over to town hall and we talked, and I said, look, and I've made it very clear, I'd like to see the village and the town be more of a team on some of these projects that merit and us being a team. All you got to do is look at where your area is here and see that it's about 50-50 town and village. This is a perfect example of where we should team up. But the devil is in the details, and I wanted to see how they wrote the resolution. And that's, we haven't got that. But
the speed with which this is taking place
Yeah.
is largely the reason behind
I know.
the lack of specificity.
And the Mayor Byards and I said, and look, there's an old saying, you'd rather have a handshake agreement with an honorable person than a 40-page contract with a scoundrel. I said, to Mayor Byards, I said, look, if you guys are in, I certainly would advocate to the town board that we're in. And if this is a $100,000 grant that is awarded for this, it's safe to say that you're in for $5,000 and we're in for $5,000. Off the top of my head. Now, I did say to him, and this is all verbal, that, if it ends up that the scope of the project and your vision and all that ends up being that everything is being done in the village end of it, I don't want to split hairs, but, I don't know if the town would put in 5,000 and the village gets 5,000. I don't know, is the village in this situation, when you write the grant, going to be the lead agency?
I mean, I believe it would likely be a village-led project.
Mm-hmm.
However, there would still need to be some negotiations between the two entities regarding obviously the contract, right? The contract's going to be signed with a single entity. And then, of course, the payment terms under that consulting agreement, how that is shared and reimbursed across the MOU that takes place between the municipalities. Obviously, it's a very important detail.
And that's, and you know, look, they look similar, and they're competing against each other. We're not gonna get both, we already said that. The town one's simple, I mean, relatively. The other one is, and Charlie, I'm looking at you, the wording of that vote resolution by us is that we were okay to enter into a IMA discussions, MOU discussions, if the, you know,
Without
I don't even know how
without
to,
seeing
you know.
the resolution, you were right to ask for it. Without seeing the resolution, obviously, we
Yeah,
can't
Well-
decide on that.
Let me ask a question here, because we all understand we're not gonna get both grants.
that's correct.
We have a better opportunity in one or the other. So I guess my question is, would it make more sense for the village to go on this on their own? Would they have a better chance than than the town adjoining with this?
Intermunicipal endeavors are looked upon very favorably. So a joint application would be looked upon very favorably.
Okay.
And I also think because the boundary runs down the middle of the identified area, to only do it on the village side of that black line is going to be a major disconnect in anything that's planned.
The boundary as defined right now, obviously, is still arbitrary, but the boundary limits are pretty logical, right? The Chiota Trail property makes a logical boundary. Phillips Road is a logical boundary. Holt Road and Orchard is a logical boundary. The 104 corridor is a logical boundary. So although it may look like it's going all over the place, there is some logic behind why that red line is there. And it just does so happen to cross, the municipality in a couple different locations. It's true.
And Matt, when you and I met on this, you also said, you just don't know what the appetite is of the Genesee, the outfit that's given this. They may look at the town one down at Gravel and Ridge and the safety aspects, especially what has happened in the last year with our tragedy that happened there. They might say, look, that's where we want to be. They might also look, like you said, and I'm seeing it all over, when you get two municipalities teaming up on things, the governments and the grants really like those. And so that I don't know, I can't get inside their heads.
And
I agree with you going for both.
the North
It makes
End one
sense.
does also dovetail with the award, the Empire State Development Award recently for future enhancements to the Xerox roadway network. And that project was identified as a regional priority by the Regional Economic Development Council, that particular project. So this does dovetail and connect with that, and that may be looked upon favorably.
That's a good point.
The GTC may look upon that favorably. They may also say, well, it seems like maybe you're overlapping too much. It's not a direct overlap, but it's just enough that you could tie the two efforts together. Trying to build upon one success after the other.
Yeah, and I'm a simple guy, I guess, is that there's two things here. One, if the board has heard and done Q&A with you and has presentations and they understand and agree with, there's validity to go after these things. That's issue one. If we all put our pinkies in and say, yeah, we should do this, and Charlie, I'll look to you, I don't even know how to word what we're going to be saying here tonight that gives him the ability to go on October 16th and show when the application that we want.
And right. And I'm going to be clear. This is an annual program. These funds come out every year. So obviously, we don't have to necessarily write both in the same year. if there's an appetite to do that, I am available to do it, and I'd be happy to do it.
Is it possible that you could write both up and then if the town opts to go with one or over the other, or they decide just to grant the one, which apparently is going to happen, it's going to be one or the other, you could reapply for the other one next year?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you could reapply. Yeah, I mean, you could submit, and it's often that they do encourage communities to then revisit that. If the GTC found fault with the application or the project, we would have conversations with them about it, and then if there was deficiencies that could be solved, you would then, make the necessary improvements and try again.
I'm sure it's clear to the board, it appears to me, we're like in competition with ourselves here, which is crazy. I mean,
It doesn't make any sense to fight ourselves. So choose your best option and do that one only. We can always come, this is awarded every year.
Yeah, I know, and Bill, it's funny, because, I don't want to repeat the whole hour and a half conversation that Matt had when he first approached me on this last Thursday. But, as he said earlier, it's a 9-county grant, usually $1.3 million. This year it's $900,000. I think it's
$1.3 million in applications, $900,000 this year in available funds.
available funds. It's a short time frame, usually 5 weeks before, between when they tell you about it and when you got to submit it. Webster, being a larger municipality, is fully functioning right now during COVID. Some of those other rural counties, they're not. And so I think we got a very good chance of getting in an application that other counties just are not, their governments are not prepared to do that right now with where they're at. That's my speculation at best. But I hear exactly what you're saying. Man, if we're sitting here trying to figure out, well, which one do we not compete against each other? The one that is for the town only is is an obvious choice in a lot of ways for this board because we're the town board. The one with the village, I've said, and we've got a lot of things going on with the village where selfishly I'd like to have a team thing going with the village for a lot of other reasons. It's an interesting conundrum because I can't disagree with you, Bill, that we are competing against each other. But I could make an argument for, if we went with just one of these, I could make an argument for going for this one, and I could make an argument for going for the other one.
I could be
It's not
missing
easy.
something, but I don't necessarily see it as competing against ourselves. Because they're going to entertain a number of applications, and Webster puts in 2. Other municipalities will put in 1, perhaps. They may have 2 as well.
The city of Rochester will probably put in 4.
Probably, right. So, I just look at it as bettering our chance of possibly getting one of them.
Well, I was very happy when Matt said, in fact, Matt, Josh, and I met on this last Thursday, and I was like, it's going to take 30 hours or whatever to write this grant, and I was like, I need to understand, well, who's spending those hours, and is it costing us money? Matt is the executive director of WIDA. He's writing the grant as part of WIDA. The town obviously puts money into WIDA each year, so he's doing what we put money into WIDA for. And if he says he can do both grant applications and get them in by the 16th, great.
I'm a little confused as to whether, I guess I don't understand how my other board members feel. If we are reluctant to do both, then that's one issue. But if we are hesitating on having a resolution passed this evening for the joint one, just because we don't know the language of it, is that something that could be done during our meeting on the 15th, before you submit this on the 16th, so that we have it nailed down as to what that resolution should say?
Yes. But I would need that resolution typed up by the clerk and in my hand the next morning.
Patty, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's why I wanted to see the village resolution. I did not know what the village agreed to.
Well, if we're in agreement that we do both, but we're worried about the wording of it, then it sounds like we can take care of the wording and make one resolution tonight and then another one on the 15th. But if the board is not in agreement that we should put in two applications, then that's a moot point.
Correct, I would rather not go through the effort and to have you back out on me right at the last second. And respectfully, I ask that you don't do that to me.
Did they have
Well, that's what I
a
was just
documented
thinking.
resolution that
We
was
could,
read at their
if
meeting?
if we wanted to, we
I
could
have not
actually
seen
pass
it.
a resolution
And I
at our
know
next workshop.
I have not seen it. And I don't know if the resolution was it was relatively informal. There was a vote taken, but the resolution was not a preordained, pre-written
Okay.
resolution
All right.
that was voted upon. It was more of like an oral vote. Yeah, okay. I make the motion that we continue exploring this.
Is that enough for you?
I mean, I would like it to probably be a little bit more. They have one more meeting.
Right. And it was just mentioned that we could pass this at our workshop next week as well.
I mean, I am not requiring a formal resolution tonight. However, with the time ticking, if there is an interest to move forward, I would like that tonight.
So what we have to decide tonight is if we're gonna do it, and then get the wording and all set for a resolution at a later date. Am I correct?
Next week.
I mean, we have to give Matt the go-ahead.
Well, yes, I'm asking for you to determine if you're committed to moving forward.
Right,
And-
tonight.
And, and that's, how you formalize that at a later date is obviously for you to determine.
I would think the resolution is going to be fairly simple, very simple.
Yes, sir.
It's either you fill out the application or you don't, and the only condition that I see is whether or not you're committed to the funds if the application's granted.
And to be honest, by that time, I will likely have the scope of work, an identified cost estimate, so you're not, you can't make a resolution that spitballs with a maximum number. I don't think that
Right.
flies. So
Do you think you could have that by next week?
I think I would have to. Next week, when?
Our workshop meeting is on Thursday, the 8th. And then our next board meeting is the 15th, which runs you right up to the day before.
And Matt, did you walk away from that board meeting in the village last week and what they voted on? You were like, if it was all in the village and there was no town convolution on the north end, did you have the confidence after the village board meeting that, hey, I can go start writing this grant, I'm in like Flint?
Yes.
I'd love to know what the hell they put in there.
Well, they didn't.
They just said, sounds like a great idea, go for it.
Yeah. Do you do resolutions like that, Charlie? Sounds like a great idea, go for it.
Well, it was also with the understanding that there was time for a more formal one. But they, just like hopefully you may or may not do tonight, it's up to you, but if you do, they were committing to allowing me to get started based on the timeline given to us. If we had an extended timeline, and we had two meetings, 2 weeks,
Yeah.
successive meetings to discuss it, one to describe, and then the other to vote, that would be
Yeah.
preferred. We can kind of make that work, but.
Well, if you were comfortable to start writing that grant based on what the village did last week, is it as simple as us tonight making him comfortable to start writing the town-only grant down on Gravel and Ridge, and then come back next week with the one about the village? Is that what you were suggesting, Patty?
Are we in agreement that we would submit the two of them? Councilman Abbott doesn't think it's a good idea. I just think maybe we need some more discussion about that, because if we don't think it's a good idea, then which one are we going to do? And how are we going to move it forward?
Let's have that discussion now.
Well, I'm sort of opening it up to that. How do you feel?
I think we should apply for both.
And I feel we should apply for both. How about you?
I don't necessarily think that, I see your point, I think it's a valid point. But when Matt said, the city of Rochester, for example, they're gonna submit 4 applications.
They might, I mean, they
might.
typically do submit
Right.
multiple every year.
Um,
I mean, I don't have a problem submitting both for both applications.
Yeah,
I just think that when they go and look at it, probably the one in the village will have a better chance of getting approved.
Right.
And the one in West Webster won't get approved.
right. And,
But on the other hand, you could say, given the issues we've dealt with over in West Webster, maybe that one would take our precedence. And we can't get in their head, we don't know.
Oh, so I'd make a motion right now to have Matt proceed on both grant applications, and we'll figure out how we're gonna get the money.
Thanks,
We'll do a formal resolution on the money issues after he proceeds with grant writing.
I'd second that. Go ahead, Dolly.
Councilman Abbott?
Aye.
Supervisor Flaherty?
Aye.
Councilwoman Cataldi?
Aye.
Councilman Cahill?
Aye.
Councilman Dean?
Aye.